multiplayer games, being able to play games with friends, families, foes, enemies, arch enemies, and terrible people online. The beauty of being able to play the game with more than one person is something people generally really like. Hell, I remember one time someone told me that they felt like single-player games shouldn't exist anymore, versus the advent multiplayer games. Then again, that same person also said that the advent battle royale games, but I know that video game should never exist. That person definitely had some opinions. But I want to talk more about this, especially when it comes to how multiplayer in games generally has changed a bit. Or at least, actually a lot more, actually. Let me explain. The go-to example is the couch co-op. Just the idea of being able to play together with a family member or a friend, just playing a game together and having fun, socializing. And generally the most easiest genre to do that kind of thing in is generally beat 'em up, because of you're already playing a beat 'em up, why not ask a player and have fun? Or some games can even include even more players, like there are some arcade games that go up to like potentially 4 people. I'm going to teach them in Ninja Turtle arcade games. Generally did that, which is a cool way of handling a co-op and multiplayer aspect. But what's interesting is when not games, but genres you don't really associate with kind of like a co-op experience, include it as a feature. Like the Telltale franchise has so many entries where you have the ability to play the game with up to like 4 players generally, which adds more to your strategy with having human players to work with. It's one of those cool things that also gets awkward when there are some entries that don't really feel built for it. Like, for example, tons of Zillia 2, and Zestiria in particular. Zillia 1 and 2 for the reason that when you use the game's main feature of linking, the other person will get turned into a bot, so that way the person who's in charge of the link can do proper combos with the AI. But it's kind of weird when player 2 or player 1 gets the controller hijacked, so that way the other player can do something for a bit. Like, it's very weird. Or to the Hysteria, where if a second player is playing as one of the Seraphim, and you do armorization, that player gets the controls hijacked, because now they're combined with the other player who's now in control, since they're playing as a Shepherd and not as a Seraphim. Once again, is a weird hiccup when it comes to adding in co-op. It's like co-op for these games generally aren't necessarily the main feature of it. It's a cool bonus, and I understand when people got upset that Tales of Arise completely omitted the co-op ability entirely in favor of just being a pure single-player RPG. A much bigger aspect when it comes to the idea of couch co-op are freaking LAN parties. We just get a whole bunch of people with multiple consoles, copies of the game, all to play together in one giant match. I have never experienced a LAN party myself at all, ever in my life. But it's like one of those cool things that you're trying to get like 32 people together in the same room and just have fun together in an entire multiplayer setting. That sounds pretty dope, although I generally see people make memes and joke about how bad of an idea it is or how not great it is. But some people I know generally highly mention how super cool it is, especially to stuff like competitions and stuff like that. And a cool thing for couch multiplayer is also competitive games. Once again, another game I wouldn't really expect to have a competitive mode, Star Ocean at a time, which has unlockable battle mode where 2 players can duke it out, which just feels very weird, but hey, it's a cool thing to include. But also stuff like the racing game genre, generally always having the ability to just play 2 people against each other in a race and have fun, which is a super cool way to do a multiplayer mode in the same room. So there's just stuff like that. Many games you have multiplayer mode that require people being in the same room, but that's kind of feels starting to feel like a thing of the past because of how things have changed nowadays. So let me start focusing more on the online multiplayer. Thanks to the power of the internet, we are all connected, for better and for worse. But that also means multiplayer games now have a completely different aspect to them. No longer must you be in the same room. Now you can just play together, whether it be with strangers or people you know, which is an interesting way of doing it, especially for online competitive games, where it'll be stuff like fighting games. You can generally constantly find opponents as long as the player base is still there, or you have the ability for, let's say, a co-op game where you just find some random person online. I remember back in the day, just helping random people online in Dead Rising 2 with the game, and just finding random people, playing with them, having fun, and just doing that, supporting them. At the end of the day, alright, have fun, good luck, I'm done. As opposed to me playing Dead Rising 3 online, where I was an effing menace and would just do diabolical stuff for them instead. So, there's a bunch of aspect of just finding random people and having fun with them in games. Or the ability to take games that are known for local multiplayer, let's say the Halo franchise, and not being able to play with your buddies online. Which does mean that one positive is that now you and your friend have the ability to have your own full screen without needing to have like a split screen mode, and it also means that generally for these games to have local multiplayer, it generally had to cut the game's visuals or performance in half, but now as with the multiplayer games, it means both players can have the full performance together and just have fun with that. And there are some games where a split screen co-op feature just wouldn't work. Like Dead Rising I mentioned, probably make the console explode if it tried to do a split screen with how many zombies are constantly being generated. Now comes to an issue I have in terms of how multiplayer has changed. Many games nowadays still have couch co-op, couch multiplayer and everything, but it starts to feel like with the power of online, many companies start using it as a crutch, or multiplayer starts feeling more like an afterthought. Because of the fact that, especially back in the day around the Xbox One era, I remember so many developers and companies would generally make excuses for why the games didn't have any sort of couch multiplayer. Generally the excuse of, well, with our busy lives, the advent of features like Xbox Live allow us to play together and everything. It's like, what the hell are y'all talking about? I know people like to use the constant excuse of busy lives, busy lives, busy lives. I have to question, one, how busy is your life that you have no time for your friends and family, period, ever? Because that feels like a kind of BS excuse, because even back in the day, adults get together. Even today, adults get together to have fun. And now you're telling me that these adults would never be in the same room, period, for anything, not even play a multiplayer game together? That sounds like complete BS, because that's something BS. I hate that overgeneralization that, oh, no matter what, it's impossible to get another person to be physically in the same room as you, which just sounds so ridiculous. One big game that got flagged for initially not planning to include local multiplayer was Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, because of the fact that games like Dragon Ball Budokai, Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi, or freaking other games like Burst Limit, generally lived and breathed by local multiplayer. So that was the main feature. Sure, Budokai Tenkaichi 3 on Wii had to be able to play online, but that was more a minority because I've seen most people just play the PS2 version. But generally, they lived and breathed with some local multiplayer. The idea of trying to make it more online-only thing was a crazy idea. It's also why I don't get people like, the game's numbers dropped off online. Yeah, because it was never going to be a big competitive game. It was a game you play for fun. The fact that the roster is hugely not balanced is part of the enjoyment for a Dragon Ball Z game, at least for me, my friends, and my family. That's part of the fun. Like, I'm not going to play online, and because people are just going to use the same characters over and over with a local multiplayer, it will just get to goof around and do fun stuff. So people trying to judge it based on the online reception always sounded crazy to me, although there are some people who do have the same opinion of me that try to judge that kind of game based on online numbers was always a fool's errand. But initially, they had no plans for the multiplayer. They later made it so one level, the Block Time Chamber, could be played multiplayer, and people have said that they later updated the game further to where every level can be played multiplayer. And this is a case where I get the idea of why they probably wouldn't include the idea of multiplayer, because of the game's graphics and performance, and then try to split that in half for multiplayer would generally probably cause the console to explode. Because of how graphic intensive it is, the weather effects, everything, after they worked very hard to put in, and then decided at last second, oh, we gotta make it more local. It's kind of one of those things, I get the mentality, but you also have to remember the game you're making for and the audience it's also being made for, you know. Now, an amazing advent of the internet is the ability to take games that were only designed for local and turn them multiplayer, like the fact that on this channel, you've seen shown their cases where playing like Mario Party online, even though the older Mario Party games were local only, they could turn them online with programs like Parsec being able to give you to do that. Like people do that for older fighting games and basically breathe new life into them, or emulators period, which just have the ability to do multiplayer stuff like that. So you can take games that were not meant for an online experience and force one into it regardless. Or there are also some games that re-released on console may include that, like recently Switch 2. Well, yeah, Switch 2 recently included Soul Calibur 2, and you can play it online. Keywords can. They said that online would be good. But you can play Soul Calibur 2 online on Nintendo Switch 2, which is a cool bonus that Nintendo puts in when it comes to those things. You know, those bonuses are granted features of emulators, but that's besides the point. So there's stuff like that that is super cool, where games that only had local multiplayer in one way, shape, or form, especially like the Game Boy Advance era link cable, you can use the power of online and emulation to pretty much create it into a multiplayer setting. I'm pretty sure I have a clip of playing Tales of Berseria in a 3-player mode, where 2 of my friends that own the game were just put together on Parsec, experimenting. That's something we can very much do. Another thing that's crazy with online on the internet is the fact that through the power of multiple things that I won't mention, I was able to get one of my friends to try out some PS4 games without him being in the same room as me and without him being over the console. So there is some things like that. I'll play some clips of that right now because of how cool that was. But with the power of the internet, you can do stuff like that. Take things that weren't meant for online, or even share games in ways that weren't even meant to be possible through the power of online. And that is a huge plus when it comes to online multiplayer. I just wish that there are times where it feels like developers don't use it as a crutch, or people don't use the excuse of everyone's too busy. It's like, y'all can make time for your family and friends. Don't give me that. Don't give me that. If y'all have your family get together, get a console, make it a party, like a tournament mode, a fighting game, like a big racing game, all of y'all play together, have fun.
Oh, you got Spider-Man too! I can play Spider-Man! Finally! I don't have to wait a million years to play it on PC! Yo, can we full screen this bitch?
Man's making demands now.
Please! Ooh, man, can you take a guess what I'm gonna pick? Okay, judge away. I'm here for the story! This is how I did P4! Judge away! JBB.
I remember when the Nintendo Switch came out, and the one of the initial announcement videos showed the idea of playing a Mario Party game that required the setup of 2 Switches, which was completely cool. The idea of, wait, you can combine the Switch together from unique multiplayer modes for games? Think of how crazy games could do that, crazy developers could do with such a feature, and then no one did jack shit with it. It was a concept that had some legs, and then developers came, shot the legs, and then walked away going, yeah, we're not doing that. Ever. At all. Which one of those things, it's like, such a cool idea, but nope, nothing. It's like how the Wii U gamepad also had some cool ideas with multiplayer modes, where one player used the gamepad and other people do other things, but some games, even Nintendo games, would generally struggle to really make an idea with them. Like even something like there's like New Smart Brothers U, you just had the gamepad person essentially able to harm or help the other player by making freaking platforms or popping a bubble so you can get back to the game. So some games would struggle to do it, but it's one of those things where an advent of new technology meant possibly a new multiplayer mode, and nope. It also feels weird how Nintendo Switch and Switch 2 by default gives you 2 controllers, with the Joy-Cons being able to use as 2 separate controllers, but it feels like so many games generally don't really use the fact that it has a built-in multiplayer by default as a feature, and will just generally ignore it, which is one of those things that, once again, Nintendo had this idea of, hey, here's 2 Joy-Cons, share the joy, have fun, and some companies would be like, no. And of course, my biggest gripe with online multiplayer, specifically on consoles, is the fact that it costs money to do. The fact that you have to pay Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo money for the ability to go online and then the online is generally not that good, or it's like very basic to the point where it's like, am I paying money for this? But when they keep increasing the price, I'll better go online. Like Nintendo and Sony, it used to be free, like PS3 era, you can play games online for free. Then like PS4 era, nope. PS Plus went from this bonus service to get games exclusively for months, and that became now the base ability you need to play online. To the point where it went from the idea that PS Plus you would pay for bonuses. It is now the idea that PS Plus is what you pay for multiplayer, and people see the extra stuff as bonuses. The intended feature of PS Plus has now just become a bonus of it. This is one of those things that I know some companies will try to sweeten the deal. Like for example, Nintendo with Switch Online's like, hey, you gotta play some classic emulation, or hey, if you get this subscription tier, then you can pretty much get bonuses like Mario Kart 8 DLC, Animal Crossing DLC, the Switch 2 updates for Zelda Breath of the Wild to the Kingdom. I try to add more incentives, and I have some people use the idea that if you're already buying the console, well, why won't you pay for online? Because the online's a unit subscription, I'll eventually have me paying more for the online than I am for the console itself. That, and also I feel like the fact that I shouldn't have to be paying online for a console if the online is just a basic feature, or sometimes something that just bought by the online it really shouldn't be. Like Tekken 8 has a freaking entire hub that you can't access unless you have online, because technically it's attached to the online mode, even if you don't necessarily have to do online features in it. But screw you. Or even like BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle won't even let you do stuff like upload stuff to the leaderboard without having an online subscription service of some kind. It's like stuff like that is my biggest pet peeve with console online. The fact that you have to pay money for something that feels like should have just been free, and most importantly, used to be free and were way cheaper, and especially when PC, you don't gotta do that whatsoever at all. It's one of those things where all the multiplayer is why I don't like the fact of using the excuse of we have busy lives, so throw money at us for us not including features that should have been there in a game. Another aspect of multiplayer is when people complain about single-player multiplayer where they feel like it apparently shouldn't, like Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 for example, or co-op games, but for the longest time people complained at the fact they were co-op games and just didn't want them to be co-op. I mean, you can play solo, but people then bitch about it. So the fact they have co-op, and also the weird mentality some people have, where they feel like if a game has co-op, it means the developers are quote-unquote forcing you to play the game multiplayer. No, fuck that idea. Forcing you to buy 2 copies of the game, when that's not the case. The co-op mode is generally a bonus. There are some games out there, typically those made by freaking Joseph Fares, that are multiplayer games and gives you the ability to buy 1 copy and another friend plays with you. So there are games like that, and those games can be played locally as well. So there are games like that. And then comes the most baffling complaint I've ever seen in my life. The idea of calling co-op games friend slop. I don't know if the person who coined that meant that ironically or not, but there are people who do use it unironically as the idea of complaining that there are some games that are multiplayer only. And that is something that baffles me because, granted, I have seen people complain when there are some games that are single player only for one reason or another, but I complain that a game that is designed for multiplayer is quote unquote friend slop? Like, ugh, they're pandering to people with friends. Okay, go out, find someone, make a friend. Go out there. You have the ability on the internet, communicate with people entirely. You have Discord groups, forums, everything. Go out there, find a friend, putting it together. What is this? Another interesting use of multiplayer mode is also for something like Final Fantasy of all things, where Final Fantasy entries on the Super Nintendo and PS1 actually let you play the game in multiplayer, where generally each player would generally have characters that exclusively they control and can give turns to and stuff like that. I remember specifically when it comes to like Final Fantasies 4, 5, not sure about 6, and Final Fantasy 9, where the original version of those games were the only time you could do that. Well, original versions and PS1 ports specifically. But Final Fantasy 9, only one version of Final Fantasy 9, the OG PS1 version, let you have this kind of multiplayer mode every time I mention to people, they're baffled it's a thing because you wouldn't associate a turn-based RPG with the ability to be multiplayer, but it's one of those things that you can do entirely, and one of the things that I'm surprised nowadays more developers haven't tried to take advantage of for more multiplayer, more online setting or anything. So it's one of those cool aspects that you would think people will do, but not really. It's one of those weird anomalies when it comes to multiplayer. That's all I want to ramble about when it comes to multiplayer in games and how things have shifted, going from the ability of casual multiplayer or also arcade multiplayer to them being shifted to online, but they're starting to feel like some developers use online as a crutch, or because the game is just not designed to have its performance cut. Like Halo 5, remember, got backlash because I know local multiplayer, but it was because the game's physics, I believe, were tied to the frame rate, so trying to reduce the frame rate for any reason would make the game's physics go all wonky. So that was the actual reason, but rather than saying that, they instead went the excuse of people have busy lives, and with the power of Xbox Live, now their life is apparently not busy enough to play multiplayer. Even though by that logic, if they're trying to use online multiplayer, they're not trying to go to their friend's house. I'm just saying. But the online multiplayer allows you to take games that weren't even designed for online and add online. Parsec, great program. Allows you to just pretty much take a game that was designed only for local and make it play it online with a friend. Stuff like that is freaking amazing and cool. So there are a lot of ups and downs when it comes to how multiplayer can be handled. There's also, like I mentioned, also some weird aspects like beat 'em up games where if a player dies, they can continue by taking another player's life and stuff like that. Although I think one time I've seen a game actually something like that, like Super Mario World, where one player can transfer all their lives to another player, which is one of those things that's like, I'm surprised more games don't do that, right? It'd just be the idea of you're quote-unquote stealing lives, because you can take it against the person's consent and all that. So, other aspects of that, like beat 'em ups, or some games that make it so that way if you die, one player dies, it's game over. Like Resident Evil 5, if one player goes down, we start from checkpoint, and that is a game where you also just can't pause the game in multiplayer. Not even in freaking, no, it's just a two-player multiplayer game, but you can't pause the game, so one player has to get up. Good luck with that, because you're pretty much stuck. I remember one instance I restarted the entire Lost in Nightmares DLC because my friend had to get up to do something, and since he died, the game just blew us out for some reason because of oh yeah, 1 minute to confirm we want to continue or not aspect. That's just a baffling way to do multiplayer, but this is one of those weird things where some games just can't be paused even if there's a co-op experience. In multiplayer games like Call of Duty, like competitive mode, I understand not being able to pause. But in a co-op game, just two people, you don't understand. The other player will understand you pause the game. Like, come on. It's that kind of stuff when it comes to multiplayer. Weird quirks for co-op games, not letting you do stuff like pause the game. But that's all I want to ramble about. Alrighty then, go out there, play games together with friends or with strangers or your arch enemies. Hope not to turn people online, because there are some people who you'll use online games as a way to just be tired of scumbags entirely. Just do such awful things that my daily is known for. For example, toxic people, League of Legends, just miserable people online, fighting games especially, will just have sore losers. So hopefully you don't run into those people, but if you do, hopefully it's the funny kind of rage and not the this person's being an awful racist transphobe kind of rage. Hopefully it's a more funny kind of rage. We can all laugh at together. Anywho, go out there, play games together. Another person, find a friend, family member, and play games together.